The pins jabbed at Kaitlyn Vargas's fingers as she adjusted the crisp white collar of the anonymous Groom model's shirt. This was her third wedding photo shoot of the month, but something about this particular job made her stomach flutter with unexpected nervousness. Perhaps it was the way the man's striking blue eyes followed her every move, or the fact that he was unnervingly silent compared to the usual chatty models. "Could you lift your chin a bit?" she asked, reaching up to adjust his tie. "Perfect. The camera will love that jawline." "Is this really how most grooms stand?" he asked, his voice deeper than she expected with a hint of amusement. "Feels a bit stiff." Kaitlyn stepped back, studying her work. The charcoal gray suit fit him impeccably, almost too well for a rental. "Most grooms are stiff, they're terrified." She smiled. "But you're not a real groom, so just look handsome and let me worry about the details, mister." Zane Lancaster," he replied, extending his hand. "And you are?" "Kaitlyn Vargas. I'm the stylist for today." She shook his hand, surprised by the warmth of his grip. "Though I assumed the agency would have briefed you on the team." "Last-minute replacement," he said with a casual shrug that somehow made the expensive suit move perfectly with him. "The original model had an emergency." Kaitlyn nodded, though something seemed off about his explanation. Most replacement models came with a flurry of agents and paperwork. This man had simply walked in alone, wearing casual clothes, carrying a garment bag, and announced himself as the groom. "Well, Elitist Weddings magazine appreciates your willingness to step in," she said professionally, stepping back to admire her work. "You clean up nicely." "I've worn a suit once or twice," he said with a wry smile. The photographer, Marcus, called from across the elaborate garden setting they'd rented for the day. "Are we ready with the groom? We're losing the perfect light." "Coming," Kaitlyn called back, then turned to Zane. "Ready to get married to a woman you've never met." "Story of my life," he muttered under his breath. "What was that?" "Nothing," he said, offering his arm gallantly. "Shall we?" As they walked toward the rose-covered arbor, Kaitlyn couldn't help but notice how different Zane was from the usual models. There was something genuine about him, a quiet confidence that didn't require constant validation or selfies. His hand occasionally brushed against hers as they walked, sending an unexpected current through her fingertips. The bride was already in position. Vanessa, a professional model Kaitlyn had worked with many times before. She looked stunning in the designer gown, but her professional smile faltered slightly when she saw Zane. "Who's this?" she asked, eyeing him with obvious interest. "Replacement groom," Kaitlyn explained, making final adjustments to Vanessa's veil. "Zane Lancaster." Vanessa's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Lancaster, like places, everyone," Marcus interrupted, waving his hands impatiently. "We've got exactly 17 minutes before that cloud bank ruins everything." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of posed intimacy. Kaitlyn watched through professional eyes as Zane and Vanessa enacted the perfect wedding: the tender gaze, the respectful kiss, the playful champagne toast. For someone who claimed to be a last-minute replacement, Zane was remarkably good at following direction and hitting his marks. During a brief break, while Vanessa was changing into a second dress for reception shots, Kaitlyn found herself alone with Zane near the refreshment table. "You're very good at this," she said, handing him a bottle of water. "Are you sure you're not a professional model?" Zane took a long sip before answering. "I'm more comfortable behind the scenes usually." "In what industry?" "Real estate, mostly. Investments." He studied her face with unexpected intensity. "What about you? How did you end up styling fake grooms for a living?" "I'm a fashion consultant," Kaitlyn corrected him. "Wedding styling is just one part of what I do. I also work with executives, politicians, anyone who needs to make the right impression." "And what impression am I making?" he asked, his voice dropping lower. Before Kaitlyn could answer, Marcus called them back to work. The rest of the day passed in a professional blur. Though Kaitlyn found herself increasingly aware of Zane's presence, the subtle cologne that wasn't overpowering like most models preferred. The way he actually listened, when she gave instructions, instead of checking himself out in every reflective surface. As the crew began packing up at sunset, Kaitlyn was surprised to find Zane still lingering, now back in his original clothes, dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt that somehow looked equally expensive as the wedding suit. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" she asked, packing her emergency styling kit. "Actually, I was wondering if you'd join me for dinner," he said, hands in his pockets, looking almost boyishly uncertain. "There's a great little place around the corner." Kaitlyn hesitated. "I don't usually date models." "Good thing I'm not actually a model," he replied with a smile that created a dimple in his right cheek. Against her better judgment, Kaitlyn found herself saying yes. There was something about his straightforward approach that was refreshing after years in an industry built on artifice. The little place around the corner turned out to be an exclusive restaurant with a months-long waiting list. Yet the maitre d' greeted Zane by name and immediately led them to a secluded table with a view of the city lights. "Regular customer?" Kaitlyn asked, raising an eyebrow as a bottle of champagne appeared without being ordered. "The owner's an old friend," Zane explained vaguely. As they moved through an exquisite dinner, Kaitlyn found herself genuinely enjoying Zane's company. He asked thoughtful questions about her career, listened to her answers, and shared just enough about himself to be interesting without dominating the conversation. "So you're in real estate?" she asked over dessert, still trying to piece together who this man really was. "Among other things," he said, then changed the subject. "Tell me about the most challenging client you've ever styled." By the end of the evening, Kaitlyn was intrigued but still confused. Zane insisted on taking care of the check, which he signed without even glancing at the total, and walked her to her car. "I'd like to see you again," he said simply as they reached her modest sedan. "I'd like that too," she admitted, surprised at her own honesty. "But I still feel like I don't really know who you are," he smiled, pulling out a business card and handing it to her. "Maybe this will help." Under the parking lot lights, Kaitlyn read the embossed text. "Zane Lancaster, CEO, Lancaster Development Group." Below that was a phone number and the company's logo, an elegant L that she suddenly realized she'd seen on several prominent buildings downtown. "You're that Lancaster?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I told you I worked in real estate," he said with a slight shrug. "Call me tomorrow." Still processing this revelation, Kaitlyn nodded. Zane leaned in slowly, giving her time to back away, but she found herself meeting him halfway for a brief, gentle kiss that somehow held more genuine feeling than any of the staged wedding kisses she'd arranged that day. As his driver pulled up in a discreet black car, Zane smiled once more. "By the way, you were right." "About what?" Most grooms are terrified on their wedding day. His eyes held hers meaningfully, but maybe with the right person they wouldn't have to be. Kaitlyn found sleep impossible that night. A quick internet search confirmed what the business card had revealed. Zane Lancaster was no ordinary real estate investor. At 32, he had built his father's modest property company into a billion-dollar development empire with holdings across 3 continents. More surprising than his wealth was his privacy. Unlike most men of his stature, there were few photos of him at social events and virtually none with romantic partners. Why would a billionaire pose as a model for a wedding magazine? She whispered to her empty apartment. The next morning, Kaitlyn received a text from an unknown number. "Coffee. I know a place that makes the best almond croissants in the city." She hesitated only briefly before responding. "I have client meetings until 2 p.m. The reply came immediately, 2:30 at Rosewood Cafe. "It's on the ground floor of my building." When Kaitlyn arrived at the sleek skyscraper bearing the Lancaster logo, she felt acutely aware of her outfit, a professional but not particularly expensive ensemble she'd chosen for client meetings. The cafe, however, was surprisingly cozy and unpretentious, with Zane already waiting at a corner table, looking far more relaxed than his surroundings might suggest. "I hope this isn't too inconvenient," he said, standing as she approached. "I figured it might be on your way." "It's fine," she replied, settling into the chair he pulled out. "Though I'm still trying to understand yesterday. Why were you pretending to be a model at my photo shoot?" Zane signaled for coffee before answering. "I wasn't exactly pretending. The agency called my office desperate for a last-minute replacement. My sister Olivia handles our public relations, and she's been pushing me to humanize my image or whatever corporate speak she uses. She thought a high-end wedding magazine would be good press." "But you didn't mention who you were," Kaitlyn pointed out. "Would it have made a difference?" he asked. "Would you have treated me differently?" Kaitlyn considered this. "Probably," she admitted. "But that's part of my job, knowing who I'm styling and for what purpose." "That's exactly why I didn't say anything. For once, I wanted to be treated like anyone else." His eyes met hers. "And then I met you, and I really didn't want to be treated differently." Their conversation flowed easily after that, and Kaitlyn was surprised to discover how much they had in common despite their vastly different circumstances. Zane had grown up in a middle-class neighborhood before his father's business took off, and he still maintained many of the values and perspectives from that upbringing. "Would you have dinner with me again tonight?" he asked as they finished their coffee. "Somewhere less fancy this time, I promise." Kaitlyn smiled. "I'd like that." Their second date was at a hole-in-the-wall pizza place where Zane claimed to have worked briefly during college. The owner, an elderly Italian man, greeted him with a crushing hug and insisted on serving them himself, regaling Kaitlyn with stories of teenage Zane's terrible pizza dough tossing skills. "So much for the mysterious billionaire image," Zane said ruefully as the owner walked away. "I like this version better," Kaitlyn admitted. Over the next few weeks, they fell into an easy rhythm. Sometimes Zane would pick her up in his surprisingly modest car for drives along the coast. Other times they'd meet after work for simple dinners or walks through the city. He showed genuine interest in her career, even asking her advice about wardrobe choices for important meetings. "Most men with your resources have personal shoppers," she pointed out one evening as they strolled through a park. "I'd rather have your opinion," he said simply. "You see people, not just clothes." 1 month into their relationship, Zane invited Kaitlyn to a charity gala, their first official public appearance together. She spent hours selecting the perfect dress, acutely aware that this would be a significant step into Zane's world. The event was as glamorous as she'd expected, with Kaitlyn feeling slightly overwhelmed by the wealth and power concentrated in one ballroom. Zane, however, stayed close to her side, his hand a reassuring presence at the small of her back as he introduced her to business partners and friends. "Lancaster, you've been keeping secrets," a silver-haired man said, eyeing Kaitlyn appreciatively. "Where have you been hiding this lovely woman?" "Walter, this is Kaitlyn Vargas," Zane said formally. "Kaitlyn, Walter Bergman, my father's oldest friend and my occasional conscience in business matters." Occasional being the operative word, Walter laughed. "He rarely listens to me anymore, but perhaps he'll listen to you, Miss Vargas. We've been trying to convince him to take a vacation for years." "I've been busy," Zane protested. "Building an empire at the expense of a life," Walter countered good-naturedly. "Though I see that might be changing." He winked at Kaitlyn. "Don't let him work through your dates. He has a terrible habit of answering emails at dinner." "I haven't done that with her," Zane said, looking slightly embarrassed. "Then there's hope for you yet," Walter said, patting Zane's shoulder before moving on to greet other guests. Later that evening, as they danced to the live orchestra, Kaitlyn noticed how many curious glances they were attracting. "People are staring," she murmured. "Because you're beautiful," Zane replied immediately. "Or because the city's most eligible bachelor is off the market." Zane's steps faltered slightly. "Is that what we are, off the market?" Kaitlyn looked up at him, suddenly uncertain. "I don't know, are we?" His arms tightened around her waist. "I'd like to think so. I haven't felt this way about anyone well, ever." The sincerity in his voice melted away her insecurities. Neither have I. Their relationship deepened over the following months. Kaitlyn met Zane's sister Olivia, who after an initially cool reception warmed considerably when she realized Kaitlyn had no interest in Zane's wealth. Zane, in turn, charmed Kaitlyn's parents during a weekend visit to their modest suburban home, helping her father with backyard projects and genuinely engaging with her mother about her community volunteer work. Not everything was perfect. Kaitlyn struggled sometimes with the imbalance in their finances, insisting on paying her own way when possible and maintaining her independence. Zane, accustomed to solving problems with resources, had to learn that some challenges in Kaitlyn's career couldn't be fixed with a phone call or investment. Their first serious argument came 6 months into their relationship, when Kaitlyn discovered Zane had quietly recommended her services to several high-profile clients. "I don't need you to build my business," she said, pacing his penthouse living room. "I've worked for everything I've achieved." "I was trying to help," he countered, looking genuinely confused by her anger. "These people needed your services. But they'll never know if they hired me for my talent or because Zane Lancaster said to," she explained, frustrated. "Don't you understand how important it is for me to know I'm succeeding on my own merits?" Zane was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't think of it that way," he finally admitted. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again. Promise, promise." He reached for her hand. "Though for the record, every one of those referrals called me afterward to thank me for introducing them to the best stylist they'd ever worked with." Kaitlyn couldn't help but smile. "Flattery won't get you out of the doghouse that easily." "What would?" he asked, pulling her closer. "Time might help," she said, though her resolve was already weakening as he kissed her neck. "I have all night," he whispered against her skin. Their relationship weathered other storms: the tabloid speculation about Kaitlyn being a gold digger, the skepticism from some of Zane's business associates, the logistical challenges of fitting their lives together. Through it all, they discovered that their different perspectives often complemented each other. Kaitlyn helped Zane see beyond the balance sheets to the human impact of his developments, while he encouraged her to think bigger about her business potential. On their 1-year anniversary, Zane surprised Kaitlyn by taking her back to the garden where they'd first met during the wedding photo shoot. He'd arranged for it to be decorated just as it had been that day, complete with the rose-covered arbor. "What are we doing here?" she asked, looking around in wonder at the twinkling lights and flowers. "I wanted to come back to where it all began," he said, taking both her hands in his. "You know, I almost didn't show up that day. Olivia had to practically blackmail me into doing that photo shoot. And now I think it was the best decision I never wanted to make." He smiled at her, his eyes reflecting the soft lights around them. "You came into my life when I was all about the next deal, the next building, the next accomplishment. You showed me there's more to life than adding zeros to my bank account. You've changed my life too," Kaitlyn said softly. "You believed in me when I was still figuring out what I wanted from my career." Zane took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about that day, how you styled me as a groom, fixed my tie, told me to look less terrified. You were a very cooperative model," she teased. "I'd like to be a real groom now," he said, his voice suddenly serious as he lowered himself to one knee. "But only if you'll be my real bride." Kaitlyn's hands flew to her mouth as Zane produced a ring box from his pocket. "Kaitlyn Vargas, you've styled me in more ways than you know. You've shaped how I see the world, how I run my business, how I imagine my future. Would you marry me and keep redesigning our lives together?" Tears blurred Kaitlyn's vision as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ring he slipped onto her finger was perfect, elegant but not ostentatious, with a center stone surrounded by smaller diamonds that caught the garden lights. "I had it designed specially," he explained as she admired it. "The center diamond is from my grandmother's ring, but I wanted something unique for you." "It's beautiful," she whispered, looking from the ring to his face. "I love you so much. "I love you too," he said, standing to pull her into his arms. "Enough to let you style me for the rest of our lives." "I hope you know what you're getting into," she laughed through happy tears. "I'm very particular about wedding attire." "I remember," he said, kissing her softly. "Though this time I don't think I'll be terrified at all." Their wedding, 6 months later, was an elegant but intimate affair that blended their worlds seamlessly. Kaitlyn's industry connections ensured every detail was perfect, while Zane's resources allowed them to host the celebration at a historic estate he'd recently restored, rather than developed a decision influenced by Kaitlyn's passion for preservation. In her vows, Kaitlyn referenced their unusual first meeting. "I thought I was just styling another model for another photo shoot. Instead, I was meeting the man who would change everything I thought I knew about love and partnership." Zane's vows made her laugh and cry. "You walked into that garden and immediately started fixing me, my tie, my posture, my expression. You haven't stopped fixing me since, in all the ways that matter most. I promise to spend our lifetime trying to be worthy of your careful attention." After a honeymoon traveling through Europe, where Zane delighted in watching Kaitlyn explore the fashion capitals she'd always dreamed of visiting, they returned to a new home they'd chosen together. Not his penthouse or her apartment, but a place that represented their shared vision. A historic brownstone they'd renovated to blend classic architecture with modern comfort. 2 years into their marriage, while Kaitlyn was establishing her own styling agency, and Zane was redirecting some of his company's focus towards sustainable development, they welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Olivia, after Zane's sister, who had inadvertently brought them together by insisting he do that photo shoot. On their daughter's first birthday, as they watched her toddle around the garden of their home, Zane wrapped his arms around Kaitlyn from behind. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" he asked. "If I hadn't agreed to be the replacement groom that day." "Sometimes," she admitted, leaning back against his chest. "But then I remember what you told me once about real estate." "What's that?" "That the perfect property finds you when you're not even looking for it." She turned in his arms to face him. "I wasn't looking for a millionaire husband when I was adjusting your boutonniere. And I wasn't looking for the love of my life when I was pretending to know how to pose for wedding photos," he countered with a smile. "I think we styled a pretty good life together," she said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "The best," he agreed, looking at their daughter playing happily in the grass. "And we're just getting started." As the California sun warmed their faces and their daughter's laughter filled the air, Kaitlyn reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a staged wedding photo shoot to a real and lasting love story. She'd styled a groom for a magazine spread, never imagining he was a millionaire who would love her forever. Sometimes the most perfect relationships happened when you least expected them, in the places you never thought to look.